Have you ever wondered how the covenants God made with his people in the Old Testament ensured their protection and advancement of his kingdom? And why do they still matter for us today? A covenant describes and outlines a binding relationship that requires faithfulness on the part of both parties. Covenants contain defined obligations and commitments, but they differ from a contract in that they are relational and deeply personal. Though these covenants outlined how God's people should respond to his faithfulness with obedience, Scripture makes it clear that God's faithfulness does not ultimately depend on the obedience of his people. It depends on his own unchanging character. There are 5 major covenants in the Old Testament: God's covenant with Noah in Genesis 8-9, God's covenant with Abraham in Genesis 12, which is further expanded in 15 and 17, God's covenant with Israel through Moses in Exodus 19-24, God's covenant with David in 2 Samuel 7, and the new covenant, which is described in Jeremiah 31. Through each one of these covenants, we see that God is the covenant maker. He is always the one who invites us into relationship with him, and our role, his human partners, is clearly outlined. God makes the promises and then asks his people to make commitments. And even despite his people, including me and you, failing to keep our commitments time and time again, all these covenants serve the purpose of creating a new partnership and relationship into God will eventually invite all humankind. Where God's covenant with Noah provided circumstances in which redemption could come, it wasn't redemptive in and of itself. God's covenant with Abraham serves as the backbone of God's renewed partnership with all humanity. And while God starts with a single family in Abraham, he moves into a community and the nation of Israel. In this springtime season, as we prepare to celebrate Shavuot, this is what we celebrate. The book of Exodus describes how God rescued Israel from slavery in Egypt and brought them to the foot of Mount Sinai, where he made a covenant with them and promised to make them his own treasured possession, a kingdom of priests and a holy, set-apart nation. Israel's role was to obey the set of laws that would help them live well as the community of God's partners, which are outlined in the next several chapters. But Israel could not uphold their part of the partnership. Within just a few chapters, we see Israel break the covenant. In Exodus 32, while Moses was on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments, the people built a golden calf, violating the very commands they had just agreed to uphold. This moment is not isolated. Israel's failure to keep the terms of the covenant becomes a recurring pattern throughout the Old Testament. But God never gives up on Israel because of what he promised to Abraham back in Genesis 12. Just as God promised, the nation of Israel entered Canaan, the land promised to Abraham, where they eventually demanded a human king. Saul from the tribe of Benjamin is anointed, but he fails to obey God, so he's rejected as king. God then chooses David, the son of Jesse, from Israel's tribe of Judah to become king, ultimately promising him in 2 Samuel 7 that one day one of his sons will come and extend the peace of God over all nations. Again, God demanded obedience and warns how he will punish disobedience. But his promise that one of David's descendants will reign forever will remain true even when the king and his people fail, which happens again and again. The Old Testament reveals that God's people continually turned to worship other gods. And as a result of their disobedience, they lost the land and were captured by other nations. The prophets spoke about a day when God would restore these covenants, even in spite of Israel's failure. That brings us to the final major covenant found in the Old Testament, the New Covenant in Jeremiah 31. The New Covenant is the culmination of God's saving work in his people. It is introduced by the prophets in the context of Israel's total failure to uphold their end of the partnership. The kings, the people, even the religious leaders failed to keep God's commands over and over again. With the New Covenant, God promises to make an everlasting covenant with his people in which he will write his law on their hearts, bring complete forgiveness of sin, and put his Spirit in them to empower them to love and obey his commands. He will raise up a faithful king from the Davidic line to rule over them, bring them back into the land and reunify them into one people of God, and cause them to be a light to the nations. The New Covenant is proof that God never abandoned his people and never will, and it is the culmination of God's saving work. God's covenants are not just ancient promises written on scrolls, they're living invitations into a relationship with the one that never goes back on his word. From Noah to Abraham, from Moses to David, and finally through the New Covenant, we see a God who relentlessly pursues his people, not because of their perfection, but because of his unwavering love. He remains faithful even when we're faithless. His covenants are the framework of redemption, the evidence of a divine love story unfolding across generations. Today, the same God is still inviting us into deeper partnership, purpose, and intimacy with Him. When we turn to Him, we can be assured of the hope-filled promise found in Jeremiah 31:34. For I will forgive their wickedness, and I will remember their sins no more. Thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned for more.